Hi viewers, welcome to the channel Global English Academy, which aims at teaching English language and literature. In this video, I'm going to talk about the historical survey of literary criticism. Before we are going to discuss in detail about the historical survey of literary criticism, we must know what is literature, what is literary criticism, and what is literary theory, and the difference between literary criticism and literary theory. And why do we study literary criticism? And why do we study literary theory? Okay, and what literature is? So we will look at all these things in this video. Thereafter, no, we will look at the historical survey of literary criticism. See, I have taken some of the important literary critics from their respective period. Say, for example, classical period. I have taken some of the important critics, literary critics like Aristotle, Plato, Longinus, Horace. And when it comes to romantic period, I have chosen some of the important critics of that period: Wordsworth, Coleridge. Like this, now we will discuss in detail about the literary critics. First, we will look at what literature is. Okay, so here the question what is literature has perplexed many thinkers because of transformed nature of literature in the recent times. In spite of such conditions, many thinkers have given different definitions of literature, but these definitions cannot be taken as a final. See, the question of what literature is, it has been perplexed many thinkers. You know why? Because of a transformed nature of literature. See, if we look at classical literature, no, the definition given by the classical writers about literature is different. Okay, if we look at romantic period, the literature of romantic period is totally different. There are so many definitions were given by the romantic writers about the literature is totally different. So it shows that the meaning of literature is keep on changing through by its time. Because of this transformed nature of literature, so it has been perplexed many thinkers. And along with this condition, no, some of the scholars they have given their own definitions of literature, but those definitions cannot be taken as a final. So we are not supposed to finalize what literature is. Okay, and we are not supposed to say that it is true about literature. No, it's wrong. But we could say this is the appropriate definition for literature. But there is no exact definition for literature. Remember this. Collins English Dictionary, it is going to define what literature is. Literature here, according to Collins English Dictionary, is a written material or a work of art such as poetry, novels, essays, especially works of imagination characterized by the excellence of style and expression and by the themes of general interest. See, here the dictionary says that literature is nothing but a work of art. Maybe it may be a poetry, it may be a novel, essay, drama, fiction, non-fiction. Okay, but those forms, those literary forms, there must be general theme. When we say work of art, when we say poetry, there must be theme. When we say poetry, there must be a style of excellence. Okay, when we say poetry, there must be imagination. So these qualities often characterized by the work of art. So this is what we call literature. Okay, and the term literature is mostly used for creative imagination, including works such as poetry, drama, fiction, and non-fiction, as I told you. And it also include oral literature. See, when we say literature is a written material or work of art, it is going to eliminate the importance of oral literature, songs, songs and so on, right? And literature is the reflection of a social and political life of the age in which it is produced. See, literature does literature not only talk about the personal life of a author, it is going to talk about the historical, social, political life of that age. Say, for example, if we take Shakespeare dramas, Shakespeare plays, so all the dramas of Shakespeare, they are going to talk about the social and political life of Elizabethan period. Okay, the way of life, how the people of Elizabethan period were living, how they live, and their way of living life. It also divided according to the historical periods, genres, and political influence. See, literature can be divided into periods. We have Old English period, Renaissance period, Middle English period, Elizabethan period, Restoration period, Romantic period, Victorian period, Modern period, and postmodern period. So, why do we call the Shakespeare age is as a Elizabethan period? Because Queen Elizabeth is ruling the country, that is the England. And why this Victorian period called as a Victorian period? Because the Queen Victoria is ruling the country. Okay, and why this romantic period called as the romantic period? Because they're the writers, romantic writers. They talk about the ordinary life of people. They were totally romantic towards the nature. Because of that reason, we call it as a romantic period. Okay, there are also many important movements of philosophies and ideologies in literature, such as romanticism, feminism, post-colonialism, structuralism, post-structuralism, postmodernism, Marxism. See, along with these periods, romantic period, Renaissance period, Victorian period, no, we have some philosophies. So these philosophies and ideologies are still trying to define literature in their own terms. Say, for example, feminism. Feminism says literature should talk about the problems of women, how woman is being subjugated or exploited by the men. And this post-colonialism still it is going to define literature should talk about the how colonized, how they subjugate, exploit the colonized people. And this Marxism still it is also going to define what literature is. This Marxism says that literature should talk about the class conflict, or it also, in other words, you could say Marxism should talk about this Marxism says literature should talk about the how this capitalist or exploiting, subjugating the working class people when it comes to means of production. So still these philosophies are defining what is literature. The scope of literature is wide and it covers everything that is on the earth. It also talks about history, politics, culture, language of a society. See, Literature, as I told you, that literature not only talk about the personal life of a author or the poet, it also talk about the history, political life, political events, culture, and the language of that period or that society. As I told you that if you look at Shakespeare plays, no, most of Shakespeare plays were deals with the historical period that takes place in the Elizabethan age, and the political life of Elizabethan age is the most significant theme of Shakespeare plays. And the language of Shakespeare drama is totally different compared to the other dramatist after Shakespeare. So how this is how literature is going to talk about the things. We think that literature is a written work of art, but it is not about that. It is going to talk so many things, as I told you now. Okay, literature can be best understood in the context of what Leo Tolstoy said about literature. He said, if it cannot be answered the two fundamental questions, who we are and how shall we live, if literature does not teach us how to live and does not tell our identity as a human being, then it is not a literature in true sense. See here, what Leo Tolstoy is going to tell us that literature should tell who we are and how we shall live our life. Okay, it should teach us how to live our life. Literature should tell us our identity as a human being, as a human being, how we should live our life in the society. So, Leo Tolstoy is going to tell us that literature should, you know, rectify. Literature should, you know, uh, improve the life of a human life. Okay, then we have what is literary criticism. See, literal criticism here, just you should look at the word criticism. Criticism means able to make a judgment, able to make a judgment. Literary criticism is the study, analysis, evaluation, and the interpretation of literature. In other words, it judges the value of a work. In literary criticism, a particular work or a body of work is evaluated according to its aesthetic value, historical, cultural, social significance of a work, use of a language, and the insights of the work. Often, these qualities are, mutually dependent or inflective. See, in literary criticism, what happens? A particular work, for example, Shakespeare Tempest or Shakespeare Romeo and Juliet drama, is going to evaluate Shakespeare's Tempest is going to evaluate in literary criticism Shakespeare's Tempest is going to evaluate based on its aesthetics values, its historical, cultural, social significance. What are the historical events that are takes place in the Tempest? What is the cultural life or the social life of a you know human beings in the Tempest? What Shakespeare is going to tell us through that drama, that is the Tempest, and how the language of that Tempest, whether the language of a Tempest is simple language, whether Shakespeare used simple language in Tempest, or the language is so noble one. We have to look at these insights. Okay, and this is how literary criticism works. It is going to evaluate a particular work. That may be the work of Shakespeare, work of other any poets, writers. But it is going to evaluate based on its aesthetics values, historical, social significance of the work, and the language of a work. Remember this. This is how literary criticism works. And Matthew Arnold, who is a 19th century literary critic, he described literary criticism as a disinterested endeavor to learn and propagate the best that is known and thought in the world. See, the definition tells us that criticism, literary criticism, is a disciplined activity that attempts to describe, study, analyze, justify, interpret, evaluate a work of art. See, look at the word disinterestedness. Disinterested. It is not a interested, it is not a uninterested. The word here is disinterestedness. Disinterested. So, being a critic, he has to criticize the work of art very honestly. Say, for example, I'm going to evaluate a Shakespeare drama, Romeo and Juliet. So, I should criticize, I should evaluate it as a critic. I'm not supposed to give more importance. I'm not supposed to in favor of Shakespeare when I'm going to evaluate or criticize the work of Shakespeare. I should be honest, being a literary critic. So this is what Matthew Arnold is going to tell us through his definition of literary criticism. And we have so many types of literary criticism. The first literary criticism and the which becomes so popular the publication of Sir Philip Sidney's Apology for Poetry, in which he talks about history over poetry and philosophies. See, this theoretical criticism is one of the types of literary criticism. It is the first literary criticism that was emerged in literary criticism. And here, Sydney's Apology for Poetry, it talks about history over poetry and philosophy. See, here Sydney says in his Apology for Poetry, poetry and philosophy both were so superior compared to history. He says that history talks about the facts, but poetry, philosophies were going to so superior compared to history because it tells what we are. The poetry and philosophy talk about what we are, but history tells the fact. So that's why poetry is going to judge. Poetry is going to you know uh, change the human life. It is going to evaluate human life, poetry, philosophy, but history tells the fact about the human life. So that's why Sydney says poetry and philosophies were both superior compared to history. And Coleridge Biographia Literaria, which was published in 1817, it talks about imagination and fancy. Okay, and you must remember this word, imagination and fancy. So Shakespeare, Coleridge talks about two types of imagination in his work Biographia Literaria. See, according to Coleridge, there are two types: primary imagination and secondary imagination. And this primary imagination occurs in all human beings. All human beings have this primary imagination, but the secondary imagination usually lies in scientist mind, in scientist, in poets. So this secondary imagination is so superior compared to primary imagination, remember this. Okay, and then we have practical or applied criticism. What is this practical criticism? This practical criticism deals with the authorial intent and ignored biographical and historical information about author. See, this practical criticism, it talks about what author is going to tell us through that work of art, and it is going to ignore, evaluate, reject the biographical and historical information which is about the author. When we are going to evaluate a work of art, as a as a practical critic, I should look at the what author is going to tell us. I'm not going to look at the historical and the biographical details about the author. So this is what practical criticism is, and this practical criticism begin with the I.R. Richardson, who gave poems to students without any information about author who wrote them and when they were written. The main objective his work is to concentrate on the words on the page rather than the relying on the preconceived or preconceived belief about the text. See, here the main intention of I. Richardson is, see, when we look at the Shakespeare, now we think that Shakespeare is a great writer, but this we are going to reject. We are going to look. We are unable to look, and we are not focus much on the contemporary writers of Shakespeare. We usually focus much on Shakespeare. We have this preconceived belief, so we should remove this, because uh, the if you look at remarkable writers, no, compared to them, no other writers, minor writers also contributed a lot to the literature. So this I. Richardson, he gave poem to his students, by removing author's name and the title of the poem and the historical background of the author. He just gave a poem, poems to his students, and they were going to evaluate it. If we know, if we think of, John Donne, no? We think that John Donne is a great poet. He usually writes, in a great way. We are not supposed to think about that. We think that John, we have this preconceived belief. But if you look at contemporaries of John Donne, no, they have also contributed a lot. They were also, written so many, important works, but we are unable to look at them because here we have John Donne. John Donne is famous writer, so we should remove this. We should, leave this. We should, left in our mind, because every literal work is essential, because somewhere the author is going to tell us something. Okay, and William Emerson, Seven Types of Ambiguity, which was published in 1930s, sorry, 1930, a study of complex and multiple meanings of poems. See, it is also one of the significant, work, literary work, published by the, written by the William Emerson. Okay, and it talks about the complexities and multiple meanings of a poem. See, the poem can tell so many meanings. Okay, so I'm going to evaluate, say for example, I'm going to evaluate Daffodils, which was written by Wordsworth. I'm going to tell my own, based on my experience, I'm going to tell my own opinion about that poem. If I gave, that poem to someone, they were going to interpret. Okay, they are going to interpret their own, based on their experience. They were going to give their own definition, meaning of that daffodils. Okay, so we have so many meanings. There is no single meaning for a single text. Okay, the a text can tell so many meanings. Then we have psychological criticism. Psychological criticism was the result of new knowledge in the field of psychology and research of Sigmund Freud, Lacan, and Carl Gustav Jung. The interpretation of dreams and the psychology of everyday life by Sigmund Freud and the psychology of unconsciousness by Jung, Carl Gustav Jung, and it enables the critic to study the interior life of a writer, then to study his works with a reference of it. See, this psychological criticism is going to evaluate, first it is going to evaluate the author's interior life or the writer's interior life, then it is going to look at the work of art written by the author. Here, this psychological critics, they first look at the personal life of a writer. You could say like this: the personal life of a writer. Then they look at the works which are written by that author, and then they were going to connect. Then they are going to connect both the interior life of a author and the works which are written by that writer. They were going to connect both. So this is how psychological criticism is about. Firstly, it is going to talk about the personal life of author. Then it is going to talk about the works which are written by that author. Then it is going to connect, amalgamate both the things. So this is how psychological criticism work. Then we have sociological and Marxist criticism. It deals with the social condition of author and how he or she respond to it. For Henry Lenin, the relationship between literature and society are reciprocal. Literature is not only the effects of social cause, it also the cause of social effect. It uses Marxist criticism as Karl Marx research represented in Das Kapital. See, the word itself says social criticism or sociological Marxist criticism. See, this social critic or the sociological criticism, it is going to look at the social condition of that author firstly. Then it is going to look at how that author is response to it social event or the social condition. And this Henry Lenin, the sociologist, no, he says that literature and society they both were reciprocal. There is no literature without society. Without society, there is no literature. Okay, they both, they both are the two faces of one coin. You could say like this. Okay, sometime literature, affect the society. Of society can affect the literature. So this is how this sociological criticism works. So remember this sociological or Marxist criticism firstly deals with the social condition of author and how this author respond to it. Say for example, any whatever the historical events took place in a work. So how this author is response to it. The author's response towards the historical events, whether the author talks about the positive opinion about the events or whether the author talks about the the negative opinion about the events. This is how sociological Marxists look at. Okay. Then we have when analyzing a text, critic asks some basic questions. Being a critic, so we have to ask ourselves when say for example if I am going to evaluate a Shakespeare Tempest or Dr. Faustus, a drama written by Christopher Marlowe, we have to remember those questions in our mind. So, what are those questions? Does a text have only one correct meaning? We should, remember this when we are going to evaluate a literary text. Whether the text is going to tell one meaning or multiple meaning, or can a text be read only for amusement or entertainment? See whether this text is going to tell only about entertainment. We have to remember this. Does the text affect each reader in the same way? How is a text influenced by culture of its author and culture in which it is written? What part or function does gender play in the writings or the reading of a text? The gender gender role, whether the woman is subjugated in a literary text, or whether the man is subjugated in literary text, is woman or is man is exploiting the woman, the role of a gender, whether the author is give minor importance to the woman character, is author give major importance to the male character. So this is how we have to look at, how we have to remember the things, the ideas when we are going to evaluate a literary text. Then we have literary theory. So literary theory is understanding the nature and the function of literature and the relation of a text of its author, reader, and society. It can be described as a frame that support literary criticism. Literary theory consists of a variety of scholarly approaches to evaluate a study. In simple terms, they can be described as the different perspectives or the angles scholars use to evaluate a literature. See, in literary criticism, a particular work is going to evaluate or interpret. But when it comes to literary theory, here whole literature is going to evaluate, and this literature is going to relate. It is going to, and this literary theory is going to relate the its author, reader, and society. Okay, remember this point. Literary theory is going to talk, is going to evaluate whole literature, but literary criticism is going to evaluate a work of art. And this literary theories, no, we have so many theories. We have formalism, reader response criticism, structuralism, post-structuralism, post-colonialism, psychological criticism, Marxism, queer theory. We have so many theories, philosophies in in literary studies. So firstly, we have this formalism. So this formalism, focus much on the formal aspects of a text. What are those formal aspects? The language of the text, and the literary device that are used in the literary text. So these formal critics, they were going to give more importance to the formal aspects of a text. They reject the biographical or the historical event that are takes place in the particular work of art. They reject this. Their main intention is to look at the language, how author use language in a literal text, and they were not going to look at what the text is going to tell us to its reader. And then we have reader response criticism, which focus on the response of the reader to a text. See, say for example, I'm reading a poem by John Donne. No? So this reader response theory, no, it is going to take the opinion of a reader. What John Donne is going to tell us is not important according to reader response theory. What's the opinion? The opinion of a reader about the John Donne, about the Shakespeare, about the T.S. Eliot is essential for reader response theory. The opinion of a reader, you could say in simple words. And then we have structuralism, which focus on universal underlining structure of a text. Gender or queer theory, which focus on the portrayal of gender and the gender relations. See, usually what happens, the male writers, they always give more importance to the male character. Okay, they reject a female character. They usually portray female character as a negative character. Sometime, okay, sometime no, these male writers they give minor importance to the female writers, and the female writers give minor importance to the male writers, male characters. Okay, and how the gender gender role, the role of gender in the literal text, whether the woman is portrayed as a negative character, whether the woman is portrayed as a devil character. So this is how the gender study looks at. And post-colonial studies we have, which focus on the influence of colonialism on literature. As I was telling you that post-colonialism, it is going to define literature like this. It talks about the influence of colonialism, how colonist, colonized, colonizer, how colonist colonized people, how colonizer discriminate, exploit the natives. Okay, and this psychological criticism focus on the role of consciousness and unconsciousness in literature. See, so this psychological criticism, no, the writers Lacan, Carl Gustav Jung, so they usually give more importance to the unconsciousness of author and the consciousness of author, the mood of author. Their intention is to focus on the mood, okay, or the consciousness of a author. Then they look at the other components of the work of art. Then we have Marxism. It is going to focus on the political, economic, and social life in literature. See, usually Marxist, Karl Marx, Friedrich Engels, they usually give more importance to the how this capitalist rule, how this capitalist subjugating the working class people, and how class is playing a significant role in literature in the society. Class conflict is essential for Marxist critic. They were going to look at political life and the economical base means of production. One who controls, one who produce the products is the owner of that production, that products and producers. So Marxism is a social theory, and their focus is usually much on how these capitalist control the society, how these capitalists exploit the working class people. This is the main object of objective of Marxist criticism. So now, as I was telling you, that the difference between literary criticism and literary theory is, literary criticism is the study, evaluation, and interpretation of literature, whereas literary theory is a different framework used to evaluate and interpret a particular work. Literary criticism is a practical application of literary theory. Literary theory is a combination of nature and the function of a literature and relation of a text to its author, reader, and society. See, I told you that literary criticism is going to evaluate a particular work, whereas literary theory is going to evaluate whole literature. And this literary criticism is a practical application to literary theory. But the literary theory, it is it combines the nature and the function of literature. What is the function of literature? What is the nature of literature? Okay, and how and the relation of a text to its author, reader, and the society. So this is the difference between literary theory and criticism. See, in this video, we have discussed what is literature, what is literary criticism, what is literary theory, and the difference between literary theory and literary criticism. Along with this, we have came to know so many philosophies where how they were going to define literature. Okay, and this is all about today's class. In the next class, I'm going to talk about the individual letter critics. As I promised you, I'm going to talk about Aristotle, Plato, Longinus, Horace from classical period. I'm going to talk about Wordsworth, the Coleridge from Romantic period. I'm going to talk about you know the T.S. Eliot, Henry Jameson, okay, and from Victorian period. So like this, now we will look at one by one literary critic in detail. Okay, thank you for watching this video. Have a nice day.